Now we get to start working on what is the literal and figuratively speaking, the centerpiece of this whole project. And literally, it is the center. I mean, it is right in the center of the whole hoop. And it is also figuratively the centerpiece because it's probably going to be the first thing that everyone's eye is drawn to when they look at this design. And so before I get started stitching, I want to talk to you about this stage of a project. And that is when you're faced with this blank slate and you're about to start, and even if you're excited to do it, it can be very intimidating. And don't think that it's because either you're a beginner or I don't know because you're gonna about to do something, techniques you've never done before. It happens to me all the time. It has happened to me with this design. It is okay to be intimidated. It happens to all of us. It is intimidating to have this blank area that you're about to start working on. And sometimes the hardest part is to just get going. And for years, I had a Mary Englebright card taped next to my work area that had a picture of a little girl that was about to put her foot at the base of a mountain and start climbing, and it just all it said was just begin. And I can't tell you how many times I looked at that when I was feeling intimidated and I thought, okay, I just have to begin. I just have to get going. And sometimes it is hard to get past that intimidation, but you know what? Just begin. So let's do that. Let's get started. Now that we've had the inspirational pep talk about this mushroom, let's talk about the technical, how we're going to actually get this mushroom stitched. And what we are going to do on this one is thread painting. Now when some of you hear thread painting, you're going to say, yay. And some of you, when you hear thread painting, you're going to thinking to yourself, uh-oh, that means long and short stitch, and that intimidates me, and I don't know that I'd never know how long to make each stitch and where to put my needle or which color to goes where. Don't worry about it. Have no worries. I'm going to show you exactly what to do, but really, we are just not going to be that precious about this thread painting. Now, don't get me wrong, I love thread painting and I love all kinds of thread painting. And, there's some thread painting or needle painting, also called long and short stitch, that can be very, like I said, very delicate and precise. And that is, I mean, if you know me, if you've done any of my other stitch alongs, you know that I usually find some way to get some thread painting into my designs. For instance, on the one we did last year, this right here, these petals are thread painting. And you can see how delicate they are. They used one strand, very subtle, precise shading about the dark colors and the light colors. And I love doing this. Love doing that kind of thread painting. What we're going to be doing here is going to be a little more free-for-all, a little looser, a little less worried about how smooth it is. It's going to have some texture, and that's going to be fine. It's going to be fun, trust me. All right, on to exactly how to stitch this. We are using 2 strands of thread, and that is the first place that this is going to differ just slightly from, truly traditional thread painting. When you're trying to get that super smooth, really delicate, fine gradation of color shading, you generally use 1 strand. And I love using 1 strand. It really does give you control over getting a nice, like really, really smooth gradation of color. But I don't want to use 1 strand here. I don't really need to use 1 strand. I don't mind if this has texture, and I don't mind if it's just a little bit chunkier than traditional needle painting. So I'm using 2 strands. You could probably even use 3 strands and it would fill up a little bit faster. So, that would be fine. But I'm using 2 strands here. The very short version about how to stitch this mushroom cap is to follow the color chart, so you don't have to worry about where the colors go because it's all spelled out for you, and use stitches, straight stitches of different lengths, following around in kind of a spiral shape. I mean, that's really sort of the most basic explanation. Of course, there's a little bit more to it than that, but really, when it comes down to it, just remind yourself, just fill in the space with enough stitches to cover the fabric until it looks good. I mean, that's the truly technical version, all right? But let me show you what I'm doing here. I've started here, and one way that we are going to follow the kind of rules, if you want to call it that, of traditional needle painting is to make sure that the length of our stitches is varied. And why is that? Because if I am stitching and I have a bunch of stitches that all start in exactly the same place next to each other, or that end in exactly the same place as each other, right next to each other, you're going to have, not a smooth spot. You're going to have like a little, I don't know what to call it, like a bar there or something, like, where all those stitches come to an end in the exact same place. So that when I am coming up, I am making sure, another thing, let me go ahead and interject this here, that I'm going to come up in an area that's already stitched and go down. As I'm working, I'm going to start here, work all the way around here. So instead of coming up in an area that's unstitched and going down in a stitched area, I come up in an area that's already stitched. The reason being that when you come up in an area, it creates a smaller hole. If I were to go take my needle up over here and go down over here, it makes a little bit more of a divot, like a little hole. And you might think it wouldn't make that much of a difference, but it does. It leaves a little bit of a hole. Again, not wrong. But we're coming up inside what we've already stitched and going down in the direction we're going. So watch what I'm doing. So I, like on the edges, it's almost like a simple stem stitch. Let me get out of here and I can show you. So I've made a stitch there, and I'm going to come up next to that stitch. I don't even care if I split the stitch, because I will be splitting stitches. And I'm going to come on down and make kind of a, so I've got a nice smooth edge right here. I'm going to jump back here, come up, and instead of, so like I'll just come down and I'll put that needle like really close to that stitch so that it's just snuggled up right next to it. I know I'm not explaining that whole outline thing very well. All right, so here's maybe a good place for you to see. So I've come up here and I could come out and I could put my needle down right even with this stitch, but I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I make it a little bit shorter. And so now, I know this is a little tiny area to see. I'm going to come up in an area that's already stitched. Same thing. I could take the needle down, if I put it down right there, even with the end of that stitch. I don't want to do that. I want to either go shorter or I want to go longer. So if I go longer, same thing. I don't want to put the needle down exactly even with that one. I either want to make it in between where those two end or longer. I'm just going to choose in between. So I'm going to keep filling in this little narrow section. Come back in the area that's stitched. I can make a decision about where to go down. I could come down like right in between, like all these three where they end. I could go down right there. I could go a bit beyond. I'm going to make a slightly longer stitch and go beyond. Come back up where I've already stitched. Now I'm going to make a shorter stitch. Hopefully you can see I've got like an area of blue right there. I'm going to go down in there somewhere. Come back up, and then I still have a little area of blue. I'm going to go down. So I'm just stitching till that area is filled up. Just keeping an eye on the length of my stitches so that I don't have areas where a bunch of stitches go down or come up in the exact same spot. When you come up in the stitching like this, it's really, that gets pretty buried. So it's really more about where you put the needle down. And just keep stitching until the blue fabric is nice and covered. All right, now I'm coming up to this curved section, and I actually need to go put some more thread on the needle. So let me do that before I keep going. Okay, I have a nice long new thread on my needle, 2 strands still, and I'm about to come and work around this corner and work up and change the direction of my stitches as I go around and go up this side. I don't want to keep going this direction because I want to make it look rounded. You know, I want to give it some shape that way. So my rule generally with curves, it seems to pretty much always hold up, is that if I have a little tight curve, my stitches get shorter. When I have a long straightaway, your stitches can be longer in general. Again, we're doing this whole long and short thing, or just, you know, various lengths of stitches. So all of these stitches will be a little shorter as I work around this corner, and then as I get here, there's still going to be various lengths, but I can make each one a little bit longer than I'm making right here. These contours that are showing the color, it's not like you have to stay exactly on that line, because I do want these colors to blend. And I maybe should have done it a little bit more here, because I made this a very, you know, a hard, very smooth line. When I get up in here, I'm gonna not worry about jumping across that line a little bit, and I will show you more what I'm talking about when I get up there. But let's get around this this curve first. So I'm still gonna come up in here, and I'm going to start thinking about making my stitches a little bit shorter. I do need to get this color down to this edge right here. So now that's going to be, I have to change directions right here. So now's when I'm going to start making slightly, or stitches quite a bit shorter. Because I still want, you know, a smooth curve right there. And if I were to do long straight stitches, I would have a real jagged curve right there. And sometimes I still get kind of a jagged curve, so I go back and I add another stitch to sort of smooth that out. So that's looking a little bit smoother. Okay, but now I've got all this space I need to fill in. So I am going to hop back here and fill in just as I was doing on that long narrow section across there. So that was a nice long stitch, but now around this curve I'm going to shorten things up, and you know, it's okay if my threads cross over each other. Like I said, we're not being too precious about this. It's not like it has to be smooth and silky, satiny smooth. That's not what we're going for here. So yeah, at these corners, these stitches are gonna cross over each other. But can you see how I'm making each stitch smaller? Shorter, I mean. Still gonna go back up in here and fill in as I get to that curve. So even though I'm going to start working this way, I still came up in some stitches that I've already made. You know, the same kind of things apply that I was thinking of when I was just working in a straight section. But the curves can throw you a little bit. But just keep working until you fill it in all the way. Just keep adding stitches. It's okay. Like I said, it's okay if it's textured. Kind of adds to it for this one. And here I'm still thinking about the lengths of my stitches. I have one ending here, one ending here. I'm gonna make that one end right in between those lengths. Same thing right there. Just think about where I'm putting the needle down. We're back over here to get this little section filled in. So same thing, I have one ending here and one ending here. I don't want to put another one ending in exactly that same spot. Like, I'll just do it. See how I've got 3 in a row now that are all generally the same length? Not what I want to do. I want to make sure that I put a stitch down that is either much longer, especially now that I'm in a more of a straightaway. I don't have to make those stitches quite so short as I did on the curve. But it's those various lengths of stitches that help the colors blend. So now as I am kind of around that corner, I can make these stitches much longer again. I'm not trying to make it around that curve. I've started to work on a more straight section. Okay, so now I'm to a point where I can start talking. I think I can start talking about what to do with this place where this color, this lighter pink, is going to sit next to this darker pink. And you could absolutely follow this line and have a nice, smooth, very distinct line of pink, like I do down here, of light pink, I mean. And then you could come in and when we do the color that comes next, which is a dark pink, it could be a very distinct line of dark pink. That would be fine. This mushroom would look fine like that. If you did the jingle all the way stitch along with me in the end of last year and the end of 2021 with the bells, we did that similar thing with the brick stitch with the bells. They looked three-dimensional when we were done, but we filled in sections of color with very distinct, crisp lines on the edge. This will look fine. If you want to blend the colors a little bit more when they sit side by side like this, just come over and so let's say I've put a stitch right there on the exact line. Let me fill that in just a little bit so maybe it'll make more sense. Put a few more stitches. Don't get caught. All right. So now I can come over and I'm going to hop out and maybe just make a few random stitches that are not inside the lines. Let's color outside the lines. How about? See that? Those are pretty short. They're probably not even going to show up. But we can just make some stitches of this color that we're using right now that are not inside its prescribed color area. This is the dark pink. This section next to it's going to be dark, but I've put some light pink stitches. You know, they may get completely covered up when we do the dark pink, but you know, a little bit of pink, of light pink will show through. And so that'll just give us some more color variation. Trying to make sure I get all that blue. I might be overworking that area right there, but hey. In fact, I think I am. I'm going to make sure I start to move up. And if you are familiar with thread painting, and if you're familiar with stitching with one strand, oh, I know what's wrong. I've gotten my thread doubled up. That's why it was looking so thick. I'm actually going to go take a couple of those stitches out because now, see, I had my thread up here at the top of the needle, and now I'm actually ended up working with 4 strands, and it's a little thicker than I want. I'm going to go take those stitches out. Well, that was kind of a silly mistake. I had not realized that see how when I put my thread in my needle that it goes for a ways, and I put it through and it's got multiple strands. It's got 4 strands where I've doubled it over the needle, and then I rarely do that. I couldn't figure out why it was looking so bulky because it had gone to 4 strands instead of 2. So anyway, now that I took out just a couple of those stitches that were just, I don't know, they probably could have stayed. It would have been fine. But anyway, I took them out. So now I'm back to just filling in like always. As I mentioned, just try to get all of that blue fabric covered. It's real simple to see because it's so dark. every once in a while you can just pop over here and make a little random stitch out in the space for the next color. And that's all you got to do. Just keep filling it in until each section is filled up. So I'm going to finish this light pink section and I'll show you the next section. Second color now for the mushroom cap, and I'm using this darker pink. Still 2 strands, same thing. You can start anywhere that you want on any one of these sections. This dark pink goes all the way around. If you look at the color chart, it encompasses this whole, it goes all the way around in like a circle. This kind of like blobby circle. So I just chose to start here. You could start here. You know, if you want to work counterclockwise, you can do that. If you want to work clockwise, I tend to work clockwise. Doesn't matter. It's just not going to matter. Just so long as you keep in mind those couple of things we talked about, various lengths of stitches, and coming up inside the stuff, the stitches that are already made. Other than that, just go for it. I will say, other than those couple of things, there's really that's just all. Just fill in every section, you know, each of these rings now, each of these areas with the same kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that at some point you're going to look at it and be like, I don't like this. This is not looking good. Something about it is, it may not happen to you, but it happened to me. And there's something about this style of just like randomly filling it in, and sometimes maybe this, you know, where you're putting blocks of color next to each other, that you're just going to be like, this isn't working. I don't know. The colors aren't blending very well. I don't understand. Doesn't look like I thought it would look. If that happens, keep forging ahead. This is, you know, I think we all have those projects where you get partway through and you're like, I hate this. I don't like this. This is not looking good. It doesn't look like I thought it would look in my head. But if you just keep going, by the end you think, oh yeah, well that did turn out. That does look the way I wanted it to look. And you're glad you didn't stop in the middle. So something about this can sometimes feel a little bit like this is not turning out the way I want it to. It looks weird. The colors aren't blending, but just keep going is my advice on that. And you know, over here I didn't do, like over here I did a lot more of those random pink, light pink stitches into the next area. I didn't even do that over here. I could come back even with, if you find you're like, oh, I forgot to do that and I want to add a little more of this, you know, this color into this color, come back. I could come back. I can come back if I just think, oh, that's just too, there's just not much color blending right there. I can come back in with the light pink and add some stitches. Hey, that works too. It's a little trickier on that curve right there. You know, you don't necessarily want to add so many that you just completely, you know, take away all of the next color, the second color, but maybe just add a few little. There, now I have a little bit of color, a little bit of the lighter color in that dark color, and that's fine. Now I can just keep going with my darker pink, and I'm just going to keep working around. It occurred to me that we talk about long and short stitch, and yes, I said that around the curves you make them shorter, and on the straightaways make them longer, but sometimes it's hard to tell on this, even like with something like my finger next to it, to know when I say you can make them longer, like how long is longer. And so right here I'm working on this sort of generally straight area, and I am making these stitches, you know, some of them, not every single one, but some of them are maybe as long as 3/8 of an inch, you know, maybe like, or if you want to do, you know, like centimeters, like a centimeter long almost. That's pretty long. Some of them, of course, are not that long because you don't want them all to be the same long length. But when you're talking about working in these sections where you don't have to make little tiny stitches to go around a curve, go ahead and make them a little bit longer, because if you're making little stitches, if your longest stitch in a section like this that's a generally straight area, if your longest stitch is an eighth of an inch, and then you're trying to make little teeny stitches that are shorter than that, that's tedious and that just is stressful. And there's just so many stitches, and you're just going to be stitching forever, and you're going to be piling so many stitches. So go ahead and lengthen those stitches quite a bit when you're working on these areas that are straight. Like I said again, now when you're working around a curve, your stitches might be, the longest stitch might be, that one's a little longer than an eighth of an inch, and that one is obviously way short. So obviously those stitches are not, you couldn't put a stitch right here necessarily that is a centimeter long. They've got to be shorter. But up in these longer straightaways, I know they're curved, but you know what I mean. They're more straight areas. Go ahead and don't be afraid to make those stitches longer, like I'm doing through here. As I get closer to finishing up this mushroom cap, there are two suggestions I want to make to you. And I'm going to stitch while I talk, so hopefully I can do both at the same time and make sense. The first one is truly just a suggestion. It's about workflow, and if fits into the way you work, that's great. You can do it. If not, then don't. That's cool too. But especially down in here when you're working on all these pinks, this method is a little bit of a thread hog in some ways, because you're just doing all these long stitches and then you're going back a ways and you're going forward, and so it does use up a little bit of thread. And to avoid having to, you'll use up a length of thread pretty quickly, is what I'm trying to say. And so what I do, so that I don't have to stitch for a short bit and then stop and thread a needle, and stitch for a short bit, stop, thread a needle, so I don't have to keep doing that, I get multiple needles and I thread them up with, maybe for those pinks, maybe 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 different needles threaded and ready to go, so that when I finish one and I finish up and I need to keep going, all I have to do is just reach over and grab a needle that is already threaded. I like to work that way because I love to stitch, and sometimes I get in a rhythm and I don't want to constantly be stopping so quickly to thread a needle again. So it's nice to just quickly reach over there, grab a needle, and keep going. So that one is just the suggestion. If it works for you, great. The other suggestion is one I really want you to make sure that you do, and that is to consistently stop stitching, get up, walk around, stretch your hands out, because this style of stitching is a lot of repetitive motion. It's the same motion over and over because it's just the same stitch, hundreds and hundreds of the same exact motion for your hand or your hands. And even as much as I stitch, my hands started to get tired and I had to stop and give them a rest, come back the next day or come back a couple hours later. Just make sure you're taking care of your hands. Don't push them so hard so that they really start to ache. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I really have to be careful that I am not pushing my hands so hard that they get to the point where I have a little bit of a flare up. So, but just take care of yourself. Also, get up and move around. Like I said, that's good for your neck, your back, everything. It's good to just get up and move. But in particular, give your hands a break, because this type of stitching is just so repetitive. When you're doing short amounts or small amounts of different stitches, it's a little easier on your hands, because sometimes the motions, while they may be similar, they're not identical. It's not the exact same motion repeated over and over hundreds and hundreds of times. Okay? So just keep that in mind. I want you guys to take care of yourselves. Stitching is relaxing, but you also need to do some things to kind of take care of yourself too while you're stitching. Okay? When you get to this last bit, this last round little circle in the middle, it's really less thread painting than it is just kind of a strange stem stitch thing. So like I'll make a stitch and advance a little bit, and then I'll back up, come up, split some stitches, make a stitch, I'll back up, advance a little bit, and just do that all the way around. As the circle gets smaller, the stitches get smaller. But that, because everything is a curve here, there's really no straightaways. Obviously, it's like this big spiral. And if I find a little section where the fabric didn't get covered all the way, I just go back and put a stitch there to cover it up. Like right here, right there, there's a little bit of a spot where the little bit of fabric is showing through. No big deal. I'll just go stick a stitch right there and cover that up. And I might put another one to kind of soften that curve. But otherwise, just like I said, just fill in this center. Doesn't really matter how you do it. It just gets some pink thread on there. That's all you got to do. Next, we are going to fill in this underside part of the mushroom cap. I think of them, they're like gills. I don't know if that's what they're really called, but that's kind of what I think of them as, gills, underneath here. And we are going to use ecru thread, 3 strands. We are going to be doing a satin stitch at angles as we go around underneath this mushroom, just like this you'll see it on the pattern. It's and you can just start stitching if you want, but if you need some guidelines are very helpful when you're doing satin stitch. I very frequently add them, so I kind of know the angles that I want to keep to, and I'm using a Frixion erasable gel pen, and I'm just going to make a couple of lines because these angles do change as they go around this mushroom, and that one will go way out. So that just helps me know kind of where to place my stitches. So let's get started. I'm going to start under here. Make some very tiny stitches right up next to that stem. And there are, in general, very generally speaking, there are 2 types of satin stitching. There's the satin stitching where, let's just say you're filling in a rectangle and all the stitches are parallel. They sit right next to each other. Then there's the satin stitching like we're doing, what I call it satin stitching in an arc. Obviously, we're going around in an arc. And so the stitches are not going to necessarily sit exactly side by side. I have a whole video tutorial as we speak on my YouTube channel that talks all about satin stitching, how to stitch parallel satin stitching. I'll have another one coming up sometime this year about the second kind, satin stitching in an arc, but that's what I'm doing now. And generally, like very briefly, what that means is, so see, I have all this space down here to put where I begin each stitch side by side. But when I get up to here, I have no room. I mean, I'm trying to cram 2, 3, 6 stitches that I've got probably almost 7 stitches that I have almost a half an inch down here to spread them out, but up here they all come to a point. So I can't just keep putting them side by side. So what I'm going to do is so I've brought this up, I'm going to tuck this stitch underneath. I'm not going to go all the way to the end. I'm going to just tuck it underneath that previous stitch. See how it's a little bit shorter and tucked underneath? So that makes that angle much sharper, and it's hidden underneath that previous stitch. And how often you do that kind of depends on how sharp your angle is, and these are pretty sharp angles right here. So I'm going to do it pretty frequently. Still coming a little short, making it not quite the distance all the way from here to here, coming to about here and tucking that stitch under. I'm going to really use use my left hand here. I'm going to really make a short stitch right here because this one is, I've got what, one, two, maybe three stitches before I get to here, and I still have to use all of these and get them back to almost the same point. So I'm going to really shorten that stitch to right there. You see that? And tuck it underneath. I'm going to do that again. Tuck it underneath. So see how I've got all these stitches sitting next, where the thread comes up, sitting right next to each other. Up here, they're all tucked under each other. So now I'm at the very corner of this, and maybe now I will go ahead and make one full stitch all the way back over to this point, and I won't tuck it under, I'll make it. And so now it kind of covers up where all of those ends of those stitches are sort of tucked under each other. Now I can continue around doing the same thing, and just when I'm going to tuck that one under, I think I'm going to tuck that one under. If you can, try not to tuck them under in the exact same place every single time because it'll get a little bit lumpy, but I'm going to make that one really short. So that this one, I think I'll make it full length. And now they're getting shorter, but I'm still, still trying to cram a lot of stitches into a little tiny section on this side. Let me jump back. We're talking about down here. Some satin stitching, you have to be really, really super precise about, the stitches all being the same length. That line is going to be covered up with some other stitching. I'm also going to put in another color here in a minute. So, make it, cover it up, but you don't have to be like panicked about how close those stitches are, how perfectly they follow that line. So even though this angle is getting a little bit shallower, I have a little more room, so I don't maybe have to tuck stitches quite as often. Now that I'm working up here where they can sit a little more parallel to each other. I'm being careful, like when I come up here, I'm trying not to split that pink thread right there. I don't want to do that. So I'm taking just a second to come up so I'm underneath that pink thread. And I chose 3 strands here because I knew I was going to be cramming a lot of stitches into a small area, and 3 strands will cover quickly, so I can do it with fewer stitches. I mean, yeah, you could definitely satin stitch with 1 strand here or 2 strands, but there's really no need. I just want to get good coverage with perhaps fewer stitches. So now I'm up here where these stitches can actually sit parallel because there's not really an angle. They're tiny, but they are parallel. It's working really hard not to split that pink thread. It's a little bit hard. So now I'm exactly halfway around the gills. So just do the same thing all the way around, just changing the angle, obviously as you go this way. So just keep going around doing that, tucking the stitches under when you need to. Next, let's add some shading at the bottom part of this section of the mushroom. And since I'm not really interested in realism here, we're going to use this fun bright green thread. This is the same green we used on the tips of the ferns, and I'm using 2 strands. This is just going to be some really simple straight stitches just bring them in along the edge here. You know, actually, you can start in the stitching. Well, I mean, we're not really thread painting here, but you can start in the stitching and just follow roughly the same angle that you did for the ecru when you were filling it in with the satin stitching. Just give it a pop of bright green right along the bottom on both sides of that stem. And just, we're going to be adding some more stripes of blue on top of this, so make sure that you get enough green in here that it'll show with some other stitching on top of it. I think maybe one more stitch will be enough. And then just do the same thing. Oh no, that needs some right there. Still a little too much ecru showing right there. Make sure I get enough. One more stitch of green. Okay, now just do the same thing on the other side as well. And now for those blue lines that I mentioned, I'm using one strand of the darkest turquoise. And now we're going to do just some lines radiating out again from the stem. Kind of think back to when you were doing the satin stitching, but just spaced out. It doesn't matter if you work from, oh, I got a little fuzzy thing right there. Okay, it doesn't matter if you work from here out or from the outside to the inside. Doesn't matter, either one, whatever is most comfortable for you. But I really love the way this blue pops against this ecru and green. So just do that all the way around as well. To finish up this last little strip of pink on the back edge of the mushroom cap, it's just really just two bands. Like first of all, I did the darkest pink right here. It's just similar to the needle painting you did up here, two strands. Just stagger the length of your stitches. I mean, it's such a little narrow space. You don't even have to, it's not even like you have to be super careful about it. Just fill it in until it's all covered up, really. And then it was roughly about, that dark pink was maybe kind of roughly 2 rows, and the lightest pink right here is, you know, two-ish rows, 2 to 3 rows of staggered stitches, and that's all there is to do for that. Really simple. We're going to hop down now to the stem, and it is done very similarly to the mushroom cap in that we're going to do thread painting. We're going to use 2 strands of thread to fill all of this in, but in a way it's easier than the mushroom cap because, you know, up here we had to swirl around in curves, and you know, this is all straight lines. I mean, this is all the stitches are going to be parallel to each other, so it's really actually more straightforward. I mean, literally straight. But anyway, I've already put in the darkest color, so it kind of started over here at the top, and just worked down the side, and I made sure that these stitches right here is a little hard to see the dark blue against the blue fabric, the deep purple fabric. But all of these lines, all of these stitches are staggered so that the ends are not the same length. I'm starting with the second color of blue. Looks really close to this one right here, but it is different. Again, 2 strands. And there's a little strip of this color on this side, and then there's a curved part up here, and then a strip down here. So I'm going to start up, I'm going to sort of mimic what I've already done. I'm going to work across here and work down, and then I'll start over and I'll just bring this, work on that little area on the right side. But for now, I'm just going to fill in right here. So I'm going to, just as I mentioned always before, start with your stitches, come up with your thread, I mean, inside the stitching you've already done. And I'm going to come way down in here, even though I'm encroaching in the sections where the other color is going to be eventually. But that's how you blend the colors, by bringing the colors into the different sections. And then just make straight stitches across that are various lengths. Don't have to fill it in solidly all the way across. I'm just sort of spacing them out, and then I'm going to work back the other direction again. So maybe now I'll come by and I'll come up inside there and make that one longer. And now I'll pop over here and I'll make one that's shorter. Hop over here, make one that ends between these two, because those are kind of similar lengths. And just fill in each colored section with the appropriate color and stitches of different lengths. I'm not sure I have quite enough color. I'm going to come way up into that dark blue. Come way down there. And so all of this right here, see, these are really long and they're really covering up the next color. Like there's going to be a band of the next lightest blue that's going to be on top of those. But I want enough of this color of blue to be there, because some of it will get covered up when I do the next lightest color. So I'm not going to skimp as I'm putting in these stitches. So maybe now I will start going down this side, this little narrow strip that goes right here. And when I get down to this band that's going to be on top of these ruffly parts, just skip right over it. Just stitch right up to it and then just drop back down. Drop on down. Make sure each area is filled all the way. Now I'm just going to hop down here. Just ignoring that band, that curved band for a moment, or for a while until we come back and work on it a little bit later. And so I am still making sure that my stitches are different lengths. I'm just filling in this narrow little strip. And these stitches, I mentioned way back in the mushroom cap that when you've got a straight section, your stitches can be longer because you're not trying to work around a curve. So that's all there is for this section. I'll show you what it looks like here in a minute. I've started on the third color now, but before I jump ahead to that, I did want to talk to you about down here at the bottom of the stem. And you can just barely, hopefully you can just barely see the faint line of where the flower is going to go on top of this. So I just made sure when I did my stitches for the stem, I just extended them on into the area that's going to be covered by the flower. You don't necessarily want to stop right at the line where the flower is going to be, because if it's that flower could vary a little bit in size. So just extend these stitches on down a ways into the area that's going to be where the flower is going to be later. But now let's look up here, and you can see it's much easier to see with this lighter color of blue how I have put in my first stitches, and you can see how staggered they are, and you can see how far up into the previous colors of blue I came. It's easier to see with this light color than with those dark colors, I think. And so and there's going to be a little bit of ecru up here, so I'm going to leave a little bit of space. I just now realized that. I probably put a little too much of this color blue, but hey, it'll be fine. That ecru will just blend right into that lighter color of blue. And I have, here again, I have a strip of this lighter color, light blue, this sort of lavenderish blue that'll go right along here. So I'm just going to fill in up here and then work on that strip all the way down the side. All right, just keep stitching. And here's the finished stem, at least the main part of the stem. And once I had finished stitching all, those two blues and the ecru, it just needed a little something extra. I just wanted to give it a little bit more oomph. So I took one strand of the darkest turquoise blue, I think it's 3844, just one strand, and I just, along the dark edge here, a few up here in this dark and a little bit over here, more down on the bottom edges, I just added in some straight stitches that I kind of tried to bury a little bit amongst the stitches that I'd already done. All of those, staggered stitches. And then I took the lighter turquoise, it's 3846, I believe, and one strand, and right here along this edge, it's like where this lightest blue meets the ecru, and a little bit on this side. Just some random, don't know if I can zoom in a little bit. There you go. So just some random straight stitches up in there to kind of just bridge the gap between that blue, and mostly, like I said, just to give it a little bit of oomph. So have fun with that. It's fun to see those bright blues mix in with the dark blues and just give this stem some life. Okay, so that's that part of the stem. So far, everything we have stitched has been fun and colorful, but it has been flat. Let's work on something three-dimensional, and it's going to be this section, this little part of the mushroom right here. We're going to work on the little ruffled section. Again, I don't know what the botanical name of it is. Let's just call it the ruffles, or the skirt, maybe, the little mushroom skirt. We're going to work on these right here. It's a really neat stitch. Let me show you how to do it. There are going to be 3 of these little ruffles on the mushroom. So we're going to do 3 separate cast on stitches, little sections of cast on stitches. And let me sort of quickly show you how, so like let's say here's that little ring that's going to go above those ruffles, like here's the top of the stem, and the stem goes down like that. We are going to do one cast on stitch, one ruffle that goes like this, and another one that we're going to go over here, and it's going to go like this, and then we're going to put one right in the center that overlaps those first 2. Hard to see, I know. So like there's the top one that goes over the bottom 2. Okay, I'll talk about that more again later. When we look at the actual mushroom, but I just wanted to explain to you they're gonna sit this way. Okay, don't be freaked out. You don't have to turn your head. I have turned my hoop so that the mushroom is facing this way because, like I said, we're going to work these stitches vertically. So that's why I've turned my hoop around. And I realized I forgot to talk to you guys about one thing when it comes to this milliner's needle, and that is how to thread the needle. It has, like I said, the eye does not bulge out, but even this kind of long needle has a somewhat small eye. Can you see that? And I'm going to try to fit 3 strands of thread through that eye, and it's kind of hard to just do that. My usual needle threader that I love so much won't work because see how it has that wide rectangular? It doesn't fit in that eye. So there's a couple things you can do. There's another needle threader that I also sell in my shop that I do love. It is a very fine, it's meant for small eyes, and it's a very fine wire right there. Do you see that? And it definitely fits inside the eye of the milliner's needle. And then I can put my thread through that very fine wire. And I am going to be very gentle, even though this is a nice quality needle threader. I'm going to be very gentle when I pull it through. Okay, I'm going to get it to the end. I'm not going to hold on to the handle. I'm going to hold onto the wire and be very careful, try not to bend it, and just pull it through. It just goes right through because that eye is nice and big. There is another option to get these strands through this eye. And lots of people do this all the time. I thread so many needles. I don't want to do this for every needle that I thread, but it does work since the eye on this milliner's needle is pretty large. You're going to want to start out with a nice blunt, nice freshly cut thread. So I'm going to snip those off. Get rid of those. All right, now I am going to pull those ends and I'm going to pinch them very tightly between two fingers. I'm going to take this eye, make sure that the eye is facing up, and I am going to pinch really hard and I'm going to squeeze those threads as I push the needle through. It kind of worked. Can you see how it caught one of, not even one, like half of a strand? See how it kind of caught through there? So it worked, kind of. Might have been better if I had a better angle of what I was looking on, and that's okay because it's on there now. But that's why I don't love that method every time, because it's a little hit or miss. So that's why I love needle threaders. So anyway, that is how to thread the milliner's needle. Remember when a ways back when I talked about being intimidated? Well, even I'm a little intimidated to do these kind of fiddly stitches on the actual hoop. But you know what? It's going to be fine. If they don't work, if they just completely crash and burn, I can just rip them out and start over. It's not a big deal. This thread is not made of gold. So let's just start. Remember, we're going to put these ruffles on this side of this little band, not the top end, because they're going to go that way. And then we're going to fill this in later. So we're going to work along this line right here. I am going to do, let me draw it for you. Hang on, let me get my piece of paper. So let's say I'm gonna face it this way. So now let's say that now we're looking at it this way. There's that band. There's the top of the mushroom. There's the bottom end of the mushroom. Okay, so first stitch I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come up here, here, and I'm gonna do this ruffle from here to here. So that's what I'm doing first. All right, I have 3 strands of ecru thread on my milliner's needle. I'm going to come up about a third of the way over, a third of the way from this end. I'm going to come up, go down right at the edge of that mushroom. I'm going to, it's a little tricky when you start because you've got that knot behind there that you try to avoid on the back. All right, so now there I am. I've come up. I'm going to leave the needle in the fabric, and I cannot find my little plastic tube. Oh, there it went. Almost rolled off the table. All right, so now slide that over. I'm going to take my ecru thread. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay. All right. Put my finger underneath. Twist it around, loop it over the end. Make sure that one's a little bit tighter. All right. 2, 3. I'm making these a little looser now. 4. Honestly, I can't remember how many stitches I wanted to do. 4, 5, 6. I think I'm gonna do 8, maybe? Should have thought of that before I started, huh? All right, this is gonna be number 8, so I'm gonna make that one a little tighter. Alright, I don't know how loose I got those in there. Hopefully I got them loose enough. Alright, so now I'm going to take the tube off. Hold those stitches, pull the needle through. Bring it over and then pull on that thread. That one is always loose, but I'm going to go down right at the end of that ruffle. So there's my first ruffle. You can kind of tug on it a little bit, pull it, but we'll do that a little bit more later. So now it's time to do the second stitch. Alright, the second one, I'm going to jump up here and I'm going to do the one on this end. It occurs to me I probably should have done this one first because this one's going to be in the way, but whatever. Okay, I'm going to do this one that goes from here to here. So I'm going to start on the inside now. Still have enough thread on my needle so I don't have to switch out my thread yet. I still got plenty to work with. Oh, I did that wrong. I came up here. I need to come up here. Hang on. Whoop, wrong. Alright, do over. Alright, now I'm going to come up here on the end of it on that side. Come up, go down about a third of the way over, and hold that thread and come up right where that is going to end. So you can see now I'm kind of going at more of an angle because we're working on sort of a curved line. So that one's going to be at that angle. I'm going to get my little plastic tube, put it over, and get all these threads to behave. All right. One. Make sure that one's tighter. 2, 3. I'm making sure these are a little looser. 4, 5, 6. On this one I'm going to make it a little bit tighter, and on number 8 I'm going to make it a little bit more tight. A little bit tighter for that one. Grip those stitches, pull the tube off, pull the needle through, pull straight up, and then pull towards me a little bit, and go down at the end of that stitch. Alright, so that's my second little ruffle. See that? Okay, now that I have those done, I am going to do a stitch that overlaps these. I'm going to come up about halfway in the middle of that one up there and then over here. So I think I have enough thread. Keep your fingers crossed. All right, I'm going to come up halfway, like about halfway. All right, in the center of that one up there. I'm going to go down at about the halfway mark of that stitch. Now this stitch is going to be longer than these other two, so I will be doing more than 8 wraps. Let me get this needle. Hold that thread out of the way. Let me get this needle to come up where I want it to come up. All right, like that. Here's the tube. Hoping I have enough thread, that I left enough thread. Alright, so now I'm going to do more than 8. I'm going to make sure that first one's a little tighter. 1. Totally lost that one. 2. 3. 4. 5. I'm making sure these are looser now. Ooh, that one wanted to twist on me. 6, 7. Whoa, that one really wanted to jump around. 8. I'm running short on thread, but I think I can make it. 8, 9, 10. I think I'm going to try 12 stitches. I hope that's not too many. 10. So these are the ends. So I'm going to make that one tighter, and this is number 12. I'm going to make it tighter. Ooh, see how that thread's twisting? I'm going to grab those stitches, take off the tube, pull the needle through, keep that ruffle over to the right side, pull tight, pull that thread tight. Alright, get that to lay down, and then put that needle down right there. Whew, they all worked. I didn't have to rip anything out. It's not always the case. Alright, there we go. Now, see how they are not perfectly pristine. They're a little bit roughly, but as I mentioned before, that's what I wanted. I didn't want perfection. I wanted interesting. Okay, so now I will tie this thread in a knot on the back, and we can stitch this little band, which will be super quick. Stitching this little band across here is super simple. It's really just kind of similar to what we were doing with all the other thread painting. But I am starting with the darkest blue, and I'm kind of holding down those ruffles so that first of all, I don't stitch into them, and I'm kind of just stitching a line of dark blue right across the top there. And you know, the color chart shows, I think it shows all 3 colors of this blue, like, you know, the really dark, the medium, and then the kind of lavender blue, as well as the ecru at the top. You know, if you didn't leave quite the same amount of room, if you don't have as much room, you don't necessarily have to do all 4 colors, but you know, they don't take up very much space. So I just am doing like a really quick row of the dark blue. Just going to put that needle aside for a minute, and then I'm going to do the next shade of blue. Same thing, just fill in. I just want it to look shaded across the bottom here. On this one, I should have plenty of room to do all those colors, I believe. But I definitely want to have, there's some darker blue at the bottom, and I definitely want to be able to have a row of ecru at the top, because that will really distinguish. It'll be a nice contrast with the stem, so you can really tell what this is. Ooh, bad knot. Come here. It is all on the back. Alright, I gotta go undo that knot. I stitched all 3 colors of blue, and then I did a line of ecru across the top. I don't think I mentioned, but I'm using 2 strands for all of this section. And I, just like I did on the stem, I came back with the dark turquoise, 1 strand of dark turquoise, and I just put some stitches in the dark section. And now I have 1 strand of the light turquoise, and I am just dropping in some straight stitches, or just kind of a line of stitches across, just sort of right underneath where that line of ecru is. And something about this turquoise thread just really unifies all of this. And I am making 1 little stitch. I did it over here, little teeny tiny stitch that kind of wraps around the edge to indicate that outside edge of that little band. Very tiny, but it does make a difference. And with that, we are through with the stem of our mushroom. We only have one thing left to do on our mushroom, and it is, of course, the spots that go on the cap. And you know, I think I think maybe the main reason that people love these mushrooms so much is not just the super fun, colorful cap color of the cap. It's red, pinks here, but it's also these white dots. They're just so fun, and we are going to achieve those by doing French knots. And I am using my milliner's needle again. If you struggle with French knots, which many people do for a couple different reasons, a milliner's needle will make it a little bit easier for you for the same reason that it's used for bullion knots, bullion stitches, and like we did the cast on stitch, is because the eye doesn't bulge, so that when you are pulling that needle through the times that you've wrapped the thread around the needle, when you pull it through, it just glides right through. But it's also going to help us make these nice kind of bulky French knots. And I am using 6 strands now of the ecru thread, and I have made sure that it is separated. I stripped them. I have a whole video on stripping, how to separate threads, strands of thread. If you haven't seen that, definitely go watch that because it makes a difference. So I'm not just using it all twisted up. I have stripped it, separated it, and recombined. So I have now the 6 strands of ecru thread. And some of these knots I'm going to vary the size by how many times I wrap the thread around the needle. Some of them are going to be wrapped 4 times. Some of them are going to be wrapped 3 times. No, 2 times. Now I can't remember. No, some of them are going to be wrapped 3 times, others 2 times, and then the smallest ones will be 1 time. So 3 wraps, 2 wraps, and 1 wrap. I can remember what I did there. So 6 strands, different numbers of wraps. So let me show you. I know a lot of you have done French knots before, maybe not with this many strands, but the fact that I have, like I mentioned, stripped them to separate them makes it easier. So I'm going to come up, hold that thread. This is going to be a knot where I wrap 1 time. I'm going to hold this thread with this. I'm going to wrap it around, put the tip back down, and I'm not going to put the needle back down in the same exact hole where I came up. That's one of the most common mistakes that beginners make. They put it right back down in the same hole. You want to just skip over like 1 thread, because if you put it back down in the same hole, the knot will just disappear. And then I'm going to, oops, it just happened on its own. I'm going to very gently pull that thread until that knot just slides down to the bottom. Pull it so that it is snug around the needle, but not super tight. Whoops, totally lost it. If it's too tight, you will struggle to get the needle through. So I'm going to start back over. That one just slipped right off. Come up, wrap once, put the needle down right next to where I came up. Now you can maybe see if I gently pull that thread, it'll slide down to the fabric. I need to push this a little bit more perpendicular to the fabric. So now I'm going to push that needle through. I'm going to keep a little bit of tension right here, so I often will put my finger right there as it's going through. That keeps the thread from sometimes knotting up on itself, and let go at the last minute. And there is my French knot. That's the smallest knot with just 1 wrap. Let me do a knot right. I'm looking at my color chart about where I want to put the knots. So let me do another one that is 1 wrap. Hold this thread, wrap. Some people wrap towards them, some people wrap away. I wrap away. It works either way. Just find what's comfortable for you. Let me show you again. Wrap once, put the needle down next to where I came up. Gently slide that thread down to the fabric. Leave a little bit of tension. Push the needle down through. Hold on to it until the last second, and there you go. Now let me do one. Now, French knots are notorious for getting your thread twisted, so if you can, the more twisted it is, the more common it is to get a knot as you're pulling through. And that's awful to have a knot as you're pulling it through because it just wrecks the whole thing. So let that thread hang. I am going to do a knot now that is 3 times, 3 wraps, but same exact thing. 1, 2, 3. I am not pulling super tight on that. That is too tight. Can you see how tight that is on the needle? Too tight. That'll be impossible to pull through and the knot will be tiny. So 1, 2, 3, so that it's up against the needle, but it can move around a little bit. Put the needle down right next to where I came up. Pull that thread down. Now it's going to be a little trickier this time because you've got more thread that's wrapped around that needle, but using the milliner's needle will help. Hold that right next to the knot, pull it through, and there is a nice big knot. See the difference in size between the 1 wrap and the 3 wraps? I'm going to do one right next to this. That is 2 wraps. This one's going to be a little bit closer to that one, kind of natural looking. All right, 2 wraps, 1, 2. Put the tip in, pull that thread down, push the needle through, hold it with my finger, and that is a smaller. That one could have been a little bit looser. I wanted that knot to be a little bit bigger, honestly, kind of more like this one. This one's bigger, but that's okay. We don't want them to be identical because it's nature, right? All right, so that is all there is to it for all of your French knots. I'm going to jump down here and do one right about here. That is 1 wrap. One right here. That is 1 wrap. And let me say, I love French knots. Many people do not, and I think it's because they struggle with them. They get all twisted up. Once you get the hang of them, people generally like them. If you just don't want to do French knots, if you're just like, I just don't want to do that, there are some alternatives. Well, one in particular that I can think of. You could switch out beads for these French knots. Now, I don't have any ecru colored or white colored beads, but I do have this bright pink. Can you see that bright pink bead right there? This is a 6/0 sized seed bead. You see that? It's a pretty big size. And so if you were to put that on there, see that's about, can you see how it's almost the same size as that nice big French knot right there? Just pretend it's ecru or white. You could definitely put beads on here. Just sew each bead down. You can maybe even sit on its side if you wanted to. If you had beads, you could definitely do beads. And that way you would not have to do all of these French knots. If it's just so stressful for you and you just don't like them that much, just do beads. Okay, you could even, maybe as another alternative, if you had some white or ecru colored wool felt, you could cut out little tiny dots, spots, and you could just stitch them down, just like with a couple of straight stitches. You know, that would be cute too. Doesn't matter. You don't have to do the French knots, but they are fun and they are easier if you are using the milliner's needle.